Let's start with the prompt. Which choice logically completes the text? This is one of our tougher prompts because we need to understand the text well enough to be able to predict in our own words what might follow. So let's start. Gestures in painting are typically thought of as bold, expressive brushstrokes. In the 70s, this painter built a 12-foot tool he named the developer to apply paint to an entire canvas in one motion, resulting in his series of slab paintings from that decade. He described this process as making an entire painting in one gesture, signaling a clear departure from the prevalence of gestures in his work from the 60s. Some historians claim this shift represents removing gesture from the process. Therefore, regardless of whether using the developer constitutes a gesture, both Witten and these art historians agree that. So, gestures are the expressive brush strokes. But then this artist applied paint to an entire canvas in one motion, and he described that as one gesture. Although art historians said that he was removing gesture. And then the conclusion says, regardless of whether you think of it as being a gesture or not being a gesture, they agree that. And I might say something simple like, this method was very different from what he had done before, because as opposed to using single brush strokes or gestures, it was all being done in one brush stroke or gesture. So let's look at the answers. Any tool that a painter uses to create an artwork is capable of creating gestures. Well, we're looking for something that doesn't judge at all whether it was a gesture or not, because that's the last little statement, regardless of whether it constitutes a gesture. So B, the work from the 60s exhibits many more gestures than the work from the 70s. That definitely is true because the later work either had 1 or 0 gestures, depending on who you're listening to, but the one before definitely had some gestures. C, he became less interested in exploring the role of gesture in his work as his career progressed. We're not really seeing anything about what happens later in his career after that. D, the work from the 60s is much more realistic than the work from the 70s. That's possibly true, but we're not seeing anything in the passage about how realistic one work is versus the other. So, answer choice B works because we know for a fact he used many gestures in the early part of his career and either 1 or 0 in the later part. So definitely more gestures in the beginning. And the answer here is B.